Welcome to the Worthy Writers Podcast. I'm your host, Kirsten McNeil, full-service book editor and confidence coach for writers. This podcast is about empowering writers and creatives to go forward on their journey with unapologetic confidence and the reminder to write for yourself. If you enjoy what you hear, leave a review and share with your friends. Let's jump in. All right, welcome to Worthy Writers, and thank you for joining me.
I'm really excited.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Pretty good headspace, pretty good direction in life.
So why don't we start off by you telling us how you got into writing?
I think it's just always been just a part of me. So I can really trace it back, like when I actually started formally writing, because I had been making up stories and doing stuff like that since I can remember. And my very first story I wrote, I dictated to my mom to write down when I was 7. So I'd always been writing, but it didn't really kickstart until I think I was about 11 or 12. And I read St. George and the Dragon by Trina Sharp-Hyman, and followed shortly after by Howard Pyle's Robin Hood, and then Ivanhoe by Sir Walter Scott. And those books right there were kind of like I want to do this. And so I remember probably 11 or 12 starting researching how to be a writer. And it really kickstarted really big by the time I was 13, 14. And then I wrote my first novel at 15. So it's just, I've loved words forever and books. And even before I could read, I pretended I could read. My mom thought I could because I would memorize them. As she read them, I would memorize them and then go through at the same pace that she did. And so she thought I was reading and I wasn't yet. So
you were crafty even then.
I was crafty even then, a little mimic. So it was either writing or acting, and I'm really shy, so it wasn't acting.
That's funny that you unofficially started writing at the age of 7, because I was 7 when I kind of got into it too. So,
oh, really?
And I know another author I was talking to the other day who she's like, oh, I started when I was 7. So it's like, is 7 a magic number?
I mean, in witchcraft it is, and in the Bible it is. But no, I think 7 is, you're leaving toddlerhood and you're now a child. So there's a different cognition. Mm-hmm. And you're not a baby anymore. So the brain starts putting things together a little different. And you start just seeing things different around that age. I noticed that when my niece turned 7, there was a change as well. It's like she went from little baby to child. Mm-hmm. I'm all for hey, let it be magic. Yeah. It's a magic number. All writers start at 7,
So, speaking of magic, you, I guess technically magic, but you write fantasy, and a lot of what you're writing right now is like angels and stuff like that. So, where do you get a lot of your inspiration from?
So, I've always been really fascinated by religion and mythology and fairy tales. So, it's just been something I've been researching and just fascinated by ever since I was really little. I chose angels and demons not because of that I'm into angels and demons. I've never really, I've been more into traditional fairy tales, dragons and, fairies and vampires and werewolves and stuff like that. Angels were not even on the horizon. However, angels get really started from my childhood in a very bad religious, dogma. It was very zealous in a really restrictive way. And some of those concepts of the Judeo-Christian kind of weird direction that some people take it, it was the catalyst for the story, and it was a good backdrop. And so angels and demons were a very easy way to describe good and evil. And that's how it started. And now, as I'm older and I realize life is much more complex, it's not just good and bad. Good is not strictly good and bad is not strictly good. That's why I have both pure angels and fallen angels, my downcast, and the downcast aren't strictly bad. So there's also shade, which are even worse. So that's there's different degrees. And It's more about going, what are constrictions we put on ourselves? Like, we are creating our own good and evil and stuff like that. And like my demons at first, you're like, evil. And then you realize, again, it's perception, it is choice and everything else. And I think growing up in a very strict religious upbringing, everything had to be black and white. There was no truth in anything other than that. And as you get older, you realize there's a lot of gray. There's not just black and white. It's not just good versus evil. And that was really the concept I really started exploring in my stories. And at least for me as the writer, I don't know if the readers get it at all, but that's for me what it was. And angels and demons were the perfect metaphor, and it just kind of unraveled. And as the series goes, we're going to be introduced to a lot more different kind of fantasy characters that really go up my alley. Because I'm like, yeah, bring in the other stuff. Because you can only go so far with the Judeo-Christian, background. And I did pull a lot of Bala and Islamic folklore as well into creating the hierarchy. And then I pulled a lot from my own paganism, because I'm an eclectic pagan. So I pulled a lot of that to create the mythos that will be unraveling throughout the series.
So did a lot of research go into it at first, or was it just stuff you already knew, or?
Yes. And so I knew it because I'd been doing research for, years and years and years. And then I had a period in 2016 where I started doing intense research into Angels and Demons, because I had the idea to write the sequel to Angel's Gate. Angel's Gate originally was supposed to be a standalone. The original is very, very different from the final drafts. I will say that they don't even look like the same story. It's the heart concept is there, but it's a very different direction, a very different story. But I started playing around with the idea of a sequel, which actually started with demons and not with angels. But the story that I came up with about demons didn't fit as a sequel. And so I started thinking about, well, what is a sequel? And then the second book happened, and I wrote the second book in 31 days. And as you know, it's a long book because I write long books. But Angel's Gate itself was written in 2012 as a NaNoWriMo challenge. So it was about 56,000 words, and the rewrite brought it up to 168,000 words. So yeah, it's a very different story. Now it's down to about 119,000. So I'm not sure where number 2 is going to end up.
Yeah.
I'm still working on the cover, and I'm like, delay the cover because I'm really slow in the editing.
Yeah, I know from our chats and stuff, you have a lot of it planned out already, a lot of your stories plotted, and you have drafts of a handful of your books already. So through that process, what's kind of your experiences through that? Like, what challenges do you face? What parts do you really enjoy? Like, what's the balance for you?
It sometimes can be very overwhelming because it is a big story. Each story is a story in and of itself, with the beginning, middle, end, different character motivations. And I really enjoy character development. So I try to, a lot goes into the characters and their evolution. So creating the big story arc that they thread through is complex enough without plotting each additional. And so it can get really overwhelming, because right now I think we're clocking in estimated 33 books before the full story is finished.
Mm-hmm.
The overall story. And some of that is just fan service to myself, going, hey, I wanted to explore this because, hey, So it can get really overwhelming, and I had to allow myself to say this is a loose outline of the series, even though I would say a good 16 of them are fully plotted from beginning to end, scene by scene plotted out. The rest of them are broad strokes plotted, and so everything after book 16 is kind of broad strokes. because I haven't been able to see the individual story from start to finish. I've been able to see the entire series from start to finish. Like I can see it from conception to the end written like in my head. And so I've written all of that down, but individual stories to move the story forward, it's basically, and I had to start telling myself that these are chapters, not, oh my God, I have to write 34 books. I had to say, no, this is chapter 1, chapter 2, and they are just installments to the series. It's like a TV show. These are just episodes, and they're complete stories, but they're still just episodes. So yeah, I get to go, hey, I finished a book, so I can put that on my tally of lifetime achievements, but it's still just part like writing chapters, so I don't get so overwhelmed. Because otherwise I'm like, will I live long enough? It feels like it's taking forever to do each one,
Yeah, the more books you create, you're gonna have readers on your butt being like, come on, where's the next one?
Yeah, so I'm kind of happy that I have like a backlog of books before it gains traction, because I'm like, I never wanted to be one of those writers who had to write on a deadline. Because my goal, even when I was 13 years old and 14 years old and deciding to be a writer, I debated whether or not to be contracted or freelance my whole career. I mean, back then, because I was like, if I go on a contract, I have to meet deadlines, and then writing is no longer writing. Writing becomes a job. And so for me, I have that fine line of putting myself into, I need to do this, need to get this done, need to edit. I mean, I was supposed to release Guardian Angel this year. It didn't happen. And I had to realize that I have to pace at the pace I need. Otherwise, I start hating what I'm doing. And then I'm like, I don't want to do it. It's not fun anymore. And when it's fun, it's a pleasure. The words flow, everything goes. It becomes a joy. And my writing has always been my escape and my joy. My business is my job. That's where you go put in the grind, but my writing is my passion. And so that was part of it too, is just deciding, do I want to be contracted where I have to hit deadlines? And so I'm like, I'm okay having 4 books written and I'm good, because then I can pace myself. And when I do get traction, people will be able to go, oh, I found you. Oh, look, there's a few books I can read already before I really start sweating for the next one. So I'm like, maybe it's fine. I'm releasing them a little slower because, by the time Guardian Angel comes out, maybe I'll have another 2 books written. So, have book 5 done. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think that's a really good takeaway, is just, everybody has their own pace. And if you don't have fun with it, why are you doing it? So.
And you can see it. The readers can see it. I can see it when my favorite authors are under deadline or under contract. The book that comes out, it's not as good. You can tell when they just starting to throw things out for money. And one of my favorite authors, I won't say the name because I will be killed by the internet. She no longer is a good writer. She was a brilliant writer and now she sucks. She's a hack. And there's actually 2 of them that did that. And I can't read their stuff anymore. I used to buy every single book and read it. And now I'm like, I won't touch your stuff with a 10-foot pole. It's just crap. And it makes me really sad. And I don't ever want to get to that point where I'm having to do it as a job. If I don't love it anymore, don't do it. It's the same with my businesses. You have to love what you do. Your clients feel it. Your readers feel it. And they feel like they know you and you belong to them. And when you're checked out, you can see it. I'm like, how did you go from a great writer to, you wouldn't be published now if you tried to submit and they didn't know who you were. And that sometimes happens. And I don't want that to happen to me.
So if a new writer walked up to you and asked, what kind of advice could you give me? What would be the first thing that kind of pops into your head?
Write. Write without editing. That's the main thing. Everyone is so caught up. I have a young writer that I'm kind of mentoring, and she's always jumping ahead into, how do I structure my chapters, and how much is a word count, and what if, should I do this, and what if I should do that? And I'm like, that doesn't matter right now. You haven't even finished your first draft. It's write the first draft. I had to learn to turn off my editor voice and just write it. Once it's down, then you can go do all the technical stuff. It's a totally different side of the brain that is engaged. So write. And the second bit of advice was don't fall in love with your first draft. Don't be so in love that that's the only book you touch for 10 years. Your first book always sucks. You don't even want to have read my first book. The first book I got published wasn't my first book. That was my third book. Still sucks. And compared to what I write now, but each book gets better, but it only gets better if you're writing. So everyone goes, I wrote my first draft, and they immediately jump in and do their second draft and do their third draft, and they keep doing it, and they haven't improved as a writer. So it sucks regardless of what draft they're on. So it's like, write the first draft, pop the champagne, celebrate. Don't look at it again for 6 months. Don't look at it for 6 months. Write something else. Write a whole other book, then go back and edit. Because you're going to learn so much on that next book. You're going to learn more by reading other stuff, by writing other stuff, that when you do pick up your cherished first book or first draft of any book that you're doing, you're going to go, I appreciate what I did, but man, this sucks. Let me fix it. You actually will have the skill to fix it. The first draft I wrote of Angel's Gate, I thought was excellent and beautiful. I went back and read it a few years later and went, ugh. But I saw the potential of the idea. And then I was able to write it into something else. And then I let it sit and then went back and drafted for my third draft and went, okay, there's a little bit of hot mess still, but it's much better. I didn't have to do as much work. But because I keep writing, every book I write, I get better. So that means my editing gets easier. It's going to be a lot easier when I edit Downcast Angel than it is Guardian Angel or Angel Child or all of the other books, because I'm a better writer. And each time you just step further and further down your path. But the only way to get there is by writing. And no one moves forward. A lot of new authors, they just get so in love with that first book, they never do anything else. And they're like, yeah, it took me 10 years to write a book. I'm like, awesome. That's great. In 10 years, I've written 15, and it's not really a numbers game, but it's like my skill level improves with each one. I wouldn't have learned how to draft the way I do. I wouldn't have learned to plot if I had just stayed with the same book. Because I was a pantser from the way back. I didn't start plotting until 2016. And so most of my career was just seat of my pants. You'd have half the book. Oh, wow, this really what the hell happened here? Because it just went direction. You're like, ah. So, but if I hadn't kept writing and kept going, I wouldn't have learned new things. If I hadn't read other books on writing, talked to other people, and just been voracious for words, just be hungry for words. That's what makes you a better writer. And that's how you keep going. I'm not the world's best writer, but I'm much better than I used to be. And I think I'm now a good writer because I'm my number one fan. I am my own critic and my own fan. So if I don't like it, no one's ever going to see it because I got to like the story. And sometimes I have a good sentence that makes me laugh, and otherwise I'm like, yeah. And if you're not reading and writing and stuff like that, you don't learn things. Like my last mini books had so many sneaky words in them. And suddenly I learned what sneaky words were. And I had to go through and cut them out of everything. I'm like, oh my God, I used a lot of LY words.
It's a very common thing because we think we want to be interesting. So we use the adverbs and words,
And oh my God, it's so much better without them. But you have to break your habits, and there's so many habits that you end up having to break. And I wouldn't have done that if you don't have other people read your work, you don't talk to other people, and you don't, just read yourself. And unfortunately, the editor comes out when I read other people, and I'm like, oh, that should be rewritten. That's is wrong. Why'd they use that word? Like, shut up, just read the book.
And I feel like one of the big problems too is when writers compare themselves to published books when they're still working on a book, and it's like, well, yeah, that's like a millionth draft as opposed to your first, second draft, right?
Yeah. Now, it does feel good when you're like, I would have written this better. Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
No, I'm at the stage now, and this total arrogance, I'm sure, but I read stuff and what the hell am I not published? And I know the answer, and that's just I don't try. Because I'm like, if this got published, why am I not? You're like, well, yeah. I should be published, because really it comes down, you have to try to get published. It's not just, I'm a better writer and I have better ideas. No, you actually have to try to do it, and you have to fail and fall on your face and keep trying and keep doing. And I have not been doing that right now. Other things come in place, and I am working towards, I have a game plan. It's my 5-year plan that has been a 5-year plan for like 7 years. But I am working to where I can become more of an owner for my business. So I have a semi-retirement. So I'm not an employee and owner. So then I can have a second career and start my writing career, like more fully.
Hopefully it all works out exactly how you want it to.
Maybe 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, but it's my 5-year plan. It will stay my 5 year.
Exactly.
It was my 5-year plan in 2017, and it's now 2021. It's still my 5 year. Hey, 2020 threw a curveball.
Yeah, that doesn't count as a year. We can just mark that off as done.
Oh, I'm on track. I'm good.
Exactly.
But I mean, I think that's another thing too, is realizing that life doesn't stick to the schedule we may want. Everyone has a different journey, and some of us are dealing with finances. Some of us are dealing with responsibilities or children or marriages that are falling apart or starting, or all the different levels of relationship or mental illness. I know with me, when I'm bipolar, and sometimes it's hard to deal with, you go manic, you can't write, you can't focus, you can't do the things you need to do. You're depressed, so it's everyone's out there at a different pace. You can't say, oh, well, this person got published at 12. Well, someone got published at 90. So everyone has their pace at life. And just because you're not published doesn't mean that you're not on the track that your life is supposed to be on. And I think that's a hard lesson to learn, because I'm solidly middle-aged now. And you're like, oh my God, I should have. Yeah, but I had to know what I know now to be the writer I am. At 20, I couldn't have written this series. There's no way. It would have been a whole bleh. And I think that's part of it too, is when you're a new writer or you're young in general, you have these great ideas, but you have no experience or training to be able to really voice them. And I had the concept for Angel's Gate a long time ago, but I didn't have the life experience to be able to express it. I didn't know how it felt, and I couldn't as easily put myself into other people's heads as I can now. And that's a big thing that I think everyone in whatever career we're in, we do, is we limit ourselves saying, I should be doing better than I am. We don't know what path we're on. We don't know how the education we're getting now, the experiences we're getting now, are going to shape us into the women or men we're supposed to be later. You don't know that. And in my 20s, when things were really hard, I had no idea where it was going. Now I can look back and go, I wouldn't change a minute, no matter how hard things were in my 20s and 30s, because I really like the person I am now in my 40s. I like who my life has created me to be. And that, I think, is something that we lose track of, because we're always so focused on, I need to get to the top of Mount Everest, that we don't realize that you can't get to the top until you learn how go up the mountain, and life is all about learning it. And then you look back and go, oh, well, it wasn't a waste of time to do this career, or it wasn't a waste of time to do that career, or to know this person, or to have my heart broken, because eventually it all pushes us to where we're supposed to be. And, you'll get to the top. You just may not get there at 12 or 15 or 23 or 33. You may be 90 when you do it, but man, you got a cool life to get you to the top. Things you learn as a writer, because writing, even if it's fiction, is all about introspection of self, figuring out you. So that's how I work out my depression and anxiety.
I feel like I could listen to you talk forever, because I love that we just have like this similar mentality about everything, and it's just so positive and encouraging. So thank you.
I think that's why we've connected, for you to be my editor on stuff. And because I do trust your opinion, because we do have not just that you like similar forms of fiction, because yes, that's important to find someone who has a similar taste, because if someone doesn't have the taste, they're not going to kind of get the genre. But having the same life connection, you need those personal relationships when you work with someone, because then you can trust that they're being honest with you when they say, hey, that book Sanctuary was a hot mess. And it was. And I needed someone to tell me what I already knew, because I think in our heart, we already know when something's like wrong, but we will lie to ourselves because they're our babies. We fall in love with them. We've committed and put time into them. So we need someone else to say, okay, I know you love your baby, but it's actually an ugly baby. So it's cute, but it's an ugly baby. So, and that's kind of how it is with our, your books. You're just like, but it's so precious. That's why you step back, because you got to let some of the newborn glow kind of fade off of them. And then you're like, oh, okay. You'll still love them always, but I'll have to tell you what I've decided to do with Sanctuary. So I will approve of it. So Downcast is now book 4, but I didn't delete Sanctuary. I'm breaking it apart. So I'll tell you more about that later.
Yeah, it's interesting how when you're the only one who's read it yet, you're like, yes, this is my work of art. This is perfect. And then you get the objective point of view, and then you're like, oh, yeah.
I kind of suspected that because, but, it's like, yeah, but you're so in love with your characters or your concept. It's hard to do anything. It's kind of like the first few months of a relationship where you're like, you're the most attractive, beautiful, wonderful person I've ever met. And then, 6 months to a year in, you're like, you fart a lot. You leave dishes everywhere. You wouldn't have noticed. You'd be like, oh, he's so cute. He's comfortable around me. He can fart. No, you realize, oh my God, that's disgusting. You slob. Doesn't mean that they're not still fabulous, but they have flaws, With books, we don't see the flaws until the new wears off. That's why I'm so adamant about don't edit for a long time. Let it settle. Go do something else. Go fall in love with something else. Then you'll be more objective. You'll be able to, what's my thing is, write drunk edit with a chainsaw. Yeah, you'll be able to edit with a chainsaw later because you're not disconnected. So I think it's very important. You need that person like you who will be honest. But I don't like people who are brutal honest. There's a difference. I want pure honesty, but I also want kindness. So give me the compliment sandwich, okay? Tell me what you liked. Tell me what's horrible. Tell me what you liked. Or give me a suggestion on how to fix it. Because that way it's more constructive. It's kind of like going to the gym when they're screaming at you and you're like, but I'm tired and fat. Okay. Let me build up, It's, you have to find the editor who works with how to motivate you as well. And you are honest, but you are kind with it, where I am more receptive. I do much better with sugar than I do with vinegar.
I feel like with anything, the more we feel attacked, we're going to get defensive. So if you don't put anything nice into it, then it's not going to get you anywhere.
yeah, when you're attacked, you kind of dig in and like, no, I love this. You don't understand. I'm going to keep this story. And that's just not helpful in any way, and maybe some people like that kind of a motivation. But for me as a teacher, it's never worked with any of my students. It's never worked with any of my employees. It has never worked with me. So I just don't do it. Even though sometimes you do want to slap someone, you're just like, you don't. You're like, I'm going to be tactful. And your results are so much better instead of being like, oh my God, you have me so mad. Or that is so terrible. You be nice about it because people are much more receptive. So it helps, and it helped me because at first I was, you don't like to get bad news. You don't like to hear any negative. But I was like, yeah, she's right. Shit, man, that was a lot of work. And then I'm like, I still wrote a book. Okay, I can still claim that. Yeah. Just because it doesn't go into the final word count of the series doesn't mean it doesn't go in my life achievements column. Okay, we're settled on there. So it made it a lot easier because you had constructive criticism, and it was constructive of, well, maybe if you do this, or maybe if you do this, and it helped where you could sit back and then, think it through and go, okay, this is what I'm going to do with it. Because you could step away and then edit ruthlessly as needed, and that's something I think it takes time as a writer to know when to be ruthless with your own work. You don't want to go crazy and just like burn it all down. There could have been something you could use. So I don't delete anything because you never know what you could keep and use, because you regret it later if you just go through and throw away everything. But it takes time to learn how to be very brutal with yourself and very honest with yourself and go, no, that as much as you like it. And so for me, it helped to have a delete bin where I have a folder where it's stuff I've deleted that taken from the main story, whatever story I'm working on, to where you may completely scrap a whole scene, but I don't throw it away. I put it in my scenes discarded to where later I can readdress them. And because sometimes you write a really good scene and it has no use in the story whatsoever. And you're like, So I save it. And weirdly enough, I've been able to take those scenes and throw them into later books. One joy of writing a series, you're like, well, this actually would work in a different story. So you don't have to get rid of everything. But on other books, standalones and stuff like that, you just save it in your trash pile. And, it was a good bit of writing. Doesn't apply to the story.
Is there any last thoughts you want to share? Any advice or tidbits?
So everyone always asks, how do you write a book? That was like the first question everyone asks you. And I've always had the same advice for years. Write one sentence and then write another. That's it. If you can just write one sentence, don't try to do anything else. Just write that one sentence and then just write another. Don't worry about pages, word count, chapters, nothing. Just write the sentence and see what happens when you write the next one. And just try to link them all together. Just one after the other. And if you get bored, switch scenes. Because if you're bored, the reader's bored, so switch scenes. You notice I jump scenes frequently. It keeps me entertained and it keeps the scene from just bogging down in the middle. If I switch POV or switch scenes, it keeps things a little more active. I kind of think of it like in a TV show or a movie where they will switch viewpoints of the camera, and that keeps things going. And mostly while you're writing, don't do any editing, don't do any research. If you have a question, write it in the manuscript. I know you've read my notes to myself. Write down, if you don't know someone's name, call them by a description. I've had angel number 1, angel number 2, I've had hero, I've had boss person, doesn't matter, whatever works. Keep going. Don't go down a 6-hour rabbit hole of baby names to find the name for this character that is a throwaway character. So that was for me the biggest thing, is I found, especially on my first novel, I would spend hours researching, were pencils developed in 18 whatever that the book was set in. And I'm like, you don't need to do that. So now if there's something was this invented during this time, I just write that to myself. And then that's what editing is for. Because once you lose momentum, everything kind of slows. And writing is less about inspiration than it is about doing the work. So get consistent, even if it's 10 minutes a day. You pick a comfortable word count that is something you can do, and go for it. For me, my baby word count is 500. That's what I try to do a day. And I don't kill myself if I have months where I don't write. It irritates me and I get cranky, but life, gets busy. But my daily word count is like 500, because that's something I can bust out in about an hour. So when I actually get off my phone, and stop talking and uploading pictures while I'm writing, going, this is me writing. No, TikToking while you're writing. And I think that's the most advice I can give, is just do those things, because everything can wait to the second draft. Just get the book written. You're going to feel really, really good. Write your next book, edit your first book, write your third book, edit your second book, so on and so forth, until the day you retire or die, whatever. It's you.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining me, and thank you for those who are listening.
Happy writing, worthy writers. Woo!
Thank you for listening to the Worthy Writers podcast. Did you enjoy this episode? Leave a review, then subscribe to both my newsletters for stories from my life and tips on building a desirable writing journey. I'd love to hear your thoughts and ideas for future episodes as well. My link tree is in the show notes with all the places we can connect. Welcome to my community. Happy writing, worthy writers!